Hey Upper East Siders and my lovely glow-getters. Welcome back to my channel. I'm excited to share with you the details of the second day and the first part of Cassie's testimony. Let's begin. First of all, as I mentioned in the first day's episode we shared yesterday, I want to repeat something. Since this is a federal case, cameras and audio recordings are prohibited in federal courtrooms. Therefore, we learn what's happening inside from journalists who are following the trial live from the courtroom. I also prepare these segments for us by verifying them through multiple sources. If you're curious about what happened on the first day, you can watch the previous video to catch up. In this episode, I want to focus specifically on Cassie's testimony. As you know, Diddy's family also attended the first day of the trial. They came again today. On the second day as well, his mother attended the hearing. Likewise, Diddy's sons were in court and all three of his daughters also came today. I mentioned this in yesterday's episode too. At one point during yesterday's trial, his daughters left the courtroom. They walked out, especially during the graphic discussions of sexual encounters. But today, Diddy's entire family attended. Everyone except his youngest daughter, Love. They sat and listened to Cassie's testimony this time, and none of them left the courtroom today. As I said, today was a very important day for the trial, perhaps one of the most important, because Cassie, or Cassandra Ventura, whom we could call the super witness of this trial, took the stand. If Cassie hadn't filed a lawsuit against Puff Diddy in 2023, none of us would be here today. None of these events would have come to light. As you know, after Cassie broke up with Diddy in 2018, she began a relationship with her personal trainer, Alex Fine, and the couple married in 2019. They have two children named Frankie and Sunny. Cassie is currently pregnant with their third child and is 8.5 months along. She attended the trial heavily pregnant. We can't get camera footage from the courtroom, but illustrators inside share sketches with us. As you can see here, Cassie attended the trial visibly close to giving birth. I wonder how Diddy felt about this. Of course, the first part of Cassie's testimony was about how she met Diddy and how their relationship developed. As you know, there was a 17-year age gap between them. Cassie said they were constantly arguing during their relationship and that these arguments almost always escalated into physical violence. Now, I want to issue a trigger warning because Cassie's testimony includes graphic descriptions of physical abuse. I will try to explain this as sensitively as possible, but consider this a warning. Cassie said that during the relationship, she constantly had bruises, especially around her eyes and other parts of her body. She spoke of always being swollen or bruised somewhere. She talked about the freak-offs. The prosecution began by asking almost every question we were curious about. But before getting into Cassie's testimony, I want to mention the cross-examination of Daniel Phillip, who testified at the end of the first day, because I want to follow the trial in the order it actually unfolds. Yesterday, on the first day, Daniel Phillip answered the prosecution's questions. He is a male dancer, and he said that during 2012 to 2013, he was with Cassie Ventura multiple times, directed by Diddy, and that the three of them were together in hotel settings. In his testimony on the first day, he explained how the relationship began and how their meetings occurred. On the second day, we began with Phillip's cross-examination. As I mentioned, Combs' defense team asked Phillip about the nature of his relationship with Ventura. They asked whether he was ever with her without Combs present and whether Cassie was under the influence of drugs or alcohol. The defense also referred to an incident Phillip described on Monday. Phillip had said that Combs got angry during an incident, threw a bottle at the wall, and then dragged Cassie by her hair into a room. The defense brought this up again. Phillip repeated his testimony and added that during this outburst, Diddy didn't want him to leave the room. In fact, after this episode of violence, he tried to get him and Cassie to engage in sex again. The defense then asked Phillip whether he had ever tried to be alone with Cassie. Phillip responded that he had reached out a few times to check on her well-being. As I mentioned in yesterday's episode, at some point Phillip said he had started to see Cassie as a friend due to the intimacy they had shared. During the cross-examination, in response to the defense's line of questioning, he said, "If she had given me a chance, I would have definitely dated Cassie." Of course, the defense had a reason for these questions. They want to suggest that Phillip had feelings for Cassie, and therefore, his testimony might not be trustworthy. Now let's move on to Cassie's testimony. 2 years after filing the lawsuit and now coming face to face with Diddy. She appeared on the stand wearing a brown long-sleeve dress. She described herself as a musician and entertainer. She stated that she had an on and off relationship with Combs that lasted around 10 years. Cassie testified that in the first year of their relationship, Diddy proposed a sexual act he referred to as voyeurism. This involved Diddy arranging for her to be with another man, an escort or dancer, while he watched. She emphasized that at the time she was only 22 years years old, felt confused and constantly anxious. But I loved him and I wanted to make him happy, she said. She said she realized she didn't want to do these freak-offs so regularly, but felt like saying no to Diddy wasn't an option. Cassie said she feared making him angry because he controlled many aspects of her life, her career, how she dressed, everything. She also feared he would use footage from the freak-offs to blackmail her. Cassie said she had been a fan of Diddy's music and that he had seemed like a larger-than-life figure, but she admitted she didn't really know him personally. Like the rest of us, she had only known Puff Diddy from TV and radio. She first met him when she was 19 in 2006, after signing a contract with Bad Boy Records. She said their relationship was platonic at that time and that Diddy was looking out for her. Cassie released her debut and only album that same year, and her single Me and You topped the Billboard Hot R&B Hip Hop chart. This was during the early breakthrough years of artists like Rihanna and Beyonce. She recalled the success of that single while on the stand. She continued seeing Diddy even as their professional relationship progressed. Later in her testimony, Cassie said she celebrated her 21st birthday in Las Vegas with Diddy and some of his friends. She said Diddy kissed her for the first time in a hotel suite during that trip. Cassie said she panicked, cried, ran away, and told her friends about it. She added that she was very naive at the time and, as a new artist in the industry, didn't know how to interpret interest from executives. After that incident, Diddy kissing her for the first time, she continued meeting him at hotels to work on music, but she said all the control gradually shifted to Diddy. Cassie explained that over time, they developed a more intimate relationship. She said their relationship evolved and Diddy began teaching her certain sexual acts. During those encounters, she said she felt tense but also curious. She added that she was sexually inexperienced and still seeing someone else at the time. When I was first preparing content about Puff Diddy and researching Cassie's background, I had come across this too. At that time, Cassie reportedly introduced her boyfriend to Puff Diddy, but eventually, Diddy's dominant presence led to the end of that relationship. The prosecution then asked Cassie if Diddy was so controlling, why did she continue to stay with him? Cassie responded, for the same reasons everyone else wanted to be with him. She was referring to a time when Diddy was the #1 figure in the music and entertainment industry. Everything revolved around him. I find that very understandable. When we met and at the start of our relationship, he was exciting, fun, and joyful, Cassie said. She added that being with him made her feel special and that he held her career in his hands. As I mentioned, she was very young, and being involved with someone like Puff Diddy, a superstar, must have felt overwhelming. Cassie said that at some point in their relationship, they traveled to Miami together. There, she used illegal substances, and they were intimate for the first time. Over time, she said she fell in love with Diddy, and they traveled together frequently and spent a lot of time in the studio. At first, they kept their relationship a secret, out of respect for their careers and for Combs' family. Because in the early stages of their relationship, Diddy was still with Kim Porter, the mother of his children. Cassie said she agreed to keep the relationship private because she didn't want to be known just as Diddy's girlfriend. She wanted to launch her music career independently without that label. I was enchanted by him, we were having a great time, everything was really fun at that point, she said. But over time, she began to see another side of Diddy. He became incredibly controlling. If she didn't reply to his messages immediately, he would have his team find her. Even if she was only 10 minutes late in responding, Diddy would send his bodyguards or staff to locate her. Control was everything, she said. From how I looked, to what I was working on that day, to who I talked to, control eventually took over every part of my life. At that point, she said, the physical and psychological abuse began. Cassie said that over the years, they both saw other people, and this made her jealous as well. Yesterday, I mentioned that in their opening statement, the defense said Diddy was a jealous man, someone who got violent because of it, but it wasn't one-sided. In fact, Tenny Garagos emphasized in her opening statement that this wasn't a federal case. It was a story of love, jealousy, and money. So when Cassie said, I was jealous too, it might end up being something the defense tries to use to their advantage later on. Cassie also said that Diddy rented her an apartment in Manhattan as a birthday gift. The defense had mentioned this in their opening too, that Diddy gave expensive gifts, houses, and cars to Cassie and other alleged victims. Cassie confirmed, yes, he rented me a house in Miami as a birthday gift, but the purpose was something else. She said the house was very close to Diddy's and that he got it so he could drop by unannounced. It wasn't a place for me to enjoy. It was a prison, she said. Cassie said she recorded hundreds of songs with Diddy under a 10-album contract, but only one album was ever released. That's very sad. She said she spent all that time in the studio with the hope that the songs would eventually be released. I dreamed of releasing them, but he never allowed any of them to come out. The prosecution then then asked, "So how were you spending your days? What were you doing?" Cassie said that at some point the freak-offs became her full-time occupation. "There was no room left in my life for anything else," she said. She described partying for days without sleep, drinking, and having sex with strangers. Cassie said the freak-offs would take up between 36 to 72 hours a week, with the longest lasting 4 days. She added that after those events, she would have to recover due to exhaustion, lack of sleep, drugs, and dehydration, so the rest of the week was spent resting. Cassie's testimony up to this point, in my opinion, is both expected and still very tragic. At 19 years old, she met Puff Diddy, and like almost anyone at that age, she was swept up in the attention of a superstar. And unfortunately, she seems to have fallen into Diddy's trap. One of my main goals in following and sharing this trial is to show what goes on behind the scenes of these glamorous lives. What really happens behind the curtain of this glittering lifestyle? Honestly, it's probably beyond what we can even comprehend. If Diddy is truly the control-obsessed figure Cassie describes, then escaping his grip, just walking away or going to the police, wasn't that simple. After the lunch break, the trial continued with Cassie's testimony. During this part, Cassie detailed how Diddy controlled her appearance. She said he dictated what she wore, her hairstyle, and even her nails. So all those glamorous designer outfits we saw had a painful story behind them. Cassie said she spent most of her time preparing for freak-offs, and even during those moments when she was at her most put together, Diddy would talk to her in a way that seriously damaged her self-confidence. She also said that although Diddy covered her rent, car, travel, clothes, and other expenses, he would take all of that away if she didn't obey him. This was yet another sign of how complete his control over her was. Cassie continued her testimony by saying she had seen handguns stored in safes at their home, and that once she was asked to take one of those guns to a nightclub. This is quite similar to the incident that allegedly happened with Jennifer Lopez. While Jennifer Lopez was with Diddy, there was a shooting at a nightclub, and rumors said she had brought the gun on his behalf. Here Cassie says something similar happened to her. She was forced to carry a gun into a club. I believe this was one of Diddy's tactics to tighten his control even further, getting someone involved in a crime so they're too scared to leave. Cassie spoke about another incident. She described a freak-off that took place in Los Angeles. She said Diddy learned that his rival, Suge Knight, was nearby. Diddy and one of his employees put on dark clothes, armed themselves, and left in an SUV. Before they left, Cassie said she screamed and cried, begging them not to do anything stupid. The prosecution then returned to asking about the freak-offs. Cassie said they happened almost weekly for years. When asked if she ever wanted to participate in them, Cassie's voice reportedly trembled and she began to cry. Until that point, she had spoken in a soft, composed voice, according to journalists inside the courtroom. But when prosecutor Emily Johnson asked, "Did you actually want to be part of these freak-offs?" Cassie couldn't hold back her tears. She said she felt deeply ashamed and that she had no one to talk to during those times. The prosecution then asked, "Was there any part of it you actually enjoyed?" Cassie said she liked the time she spent alone with Diddy. While testifying about freak-offs that went on for days, Cassie said she never slept during them and stayed awake using drugs provided by Diddy. She said she didn't want to take part in the freak-offs, that they disgusted her, and that she felt degraded. Cassie explained that she joined them because she didn't want to disappoint Diddy. She cried on the stand and said she felt terrible about it, but believed she had no other choice. She cried for quite a while. She said Diddy constantly belittled her and that even when she expressed herself or said she didn't want to participate, he didn't care. She also said Diddy insulted her for not wanting to join the freak-offs. He would say things like, "You're so ordinary and predictable." At this point, the prosecution continued asking about the freak-offs, and Cassie started naming the specific locations they were held and the nicknames used. She said she called Diddy Pop Pop. She explained that when asked what she called her grandfather, she said Pop Pop, and Diddy replied, "Okay, you can call me that too." Cassie said she thought it was a weird nickname, but used it anyway. She also talked about the hotels used for the freak-offs. She said the damage to the hotel rooms was often so bad that the hotels charged extra fees. In one case, a hotel had to completely redecorate the room from scratch after an event. Cassie also detailed some graphic sexual acts that Diddy himself participated in during the freak-offs. At this point, the court took another short break. I'm especially curious about what the jury was thinking up to this point. In our previous episode, I mentioned there are 12 jurors in this case. Their ages range from 30 to 74, and they're ordinary people like us. Listening to stories of days-long parties, illegal drugs, escorts, code names, other celebrities, what are they thinking? They probably feel like they're hearing stories from a parallel universe. But we must remember something, as the prosecution constantly emphasizes, this case is not about a superstar's bedroom. The reason this is in federal court has nothing to do with Puff Diddy's personal preferences or private life. This case involves coercion, kidnapping, threats. People were allegedly flown across state lines just to attend these parties, some even brought in from other countries. It also involves drug trafficking. We're not here just because of wild Hollywood parties. That's not why a federal court has been convened. The prosecution claims these were criminal events and that Diddy has been running a criminal enterprise for 20 years. This trial is meant to prove that to the jury. Diddy is not on trial for partying, but for allegedly orchestrating crimes. And I think we shouldn't forget that. After the break, the trial resumed with Cassie's continued testimony. Cassie spoke about how she hired dancers to participate in freak-offs by responding to Craigslist and other online ads. She explained how the payments were handled and how logistics were arranged. Cassie was asked how much illegal substances she used during the freak-offs. She said she tried to numb herself as much as possible in order to mentally escape the experience, so she used a lot of drugs. This is where the second day of the trial ended. Now, I'd like to reflect with you on Cassie's testimony so far. It's clear that the relationship between Diddy and Cassie was truly toxic. Cassie had to endure a lot, physically, mentally, and sexually. She suffered in more ways than one. And as we've all seen, there's even a video of the physical abuse she experienced, which is also being shown in court. What I wonder is, during all those moments when she felt most helpless, did she ever imagine that one day, 8.5 months pregnant, she would stand in a federal courtroom and testify against Diddy? Of course, Diddy's legal team will challenge Cassie's claims. That's what the cross-examination will be for. It hasn't started yet. Cassie's testimony is still being taken by the prosecution, but we can already guess, based on their opening statements, what Diddy's side will argue: that Cassie was never forced into anything, that she was a willing participant. After all, it was a 10-year relationship. They will try to convince the jury of this. Yes, it had ups and downs, but she stayed willingly, they'll say. They'll emphasize if she had really been forced or abused, she wouldn't have stayed for a decade. And they'll say that the things Cassie is now crying about, things she claims she was coerced into, were things she chose to do willingly at the time. But I think we should not only consider Cassie's testimony alone, we also need to keep the other witness statements in mind. For example, Daniel Phillip, the male dancer I talked about at the beginning of this episode, said he was paid by Cassie. Will the jury believe that Cassie was truly forced into everything that's being described? I think that if the jury pays attention to the themes of power and control in Cassie's story, they might realize that, even in the moments that seemed voluntary, there were deeper forces at play. According to Cassie, Diddy recorded many of these freak-offs and held onto the tapes in order to blackmail her. So even if she wanted to refuse, how could she, knowing those tapes were in Diddy's possession? However, let's not forget, in their opening statement, Diddy's legal team said those recordings were not taken with Diddy's devices, but with Cassie's? How will they prove that? We'll likely find out through expert witnesses who will testify about the digital data on those devices. I'm looking forward to that part of the trial. Another question on my mind is this: was Cassie the prosecution's strongest piece of evidence, and was it the right move to put her on the stand at the very beginning? Of course, in high-profile trials like this, the prosecution wants to start strong. And looking at the first two witnesses they brought to the stand, both were used to support and validate Cassie's story. By doing that, the prosecution got to show the jury that infamous video of the physical abuse right away. And then they followed up by putting Cassie herself on the stand. So I think the prosecution made a very strong start. Let's not forget, Cassie is 8.5 months pregnant, so they probably wanted to get her testimony in before she goes into labor. What do you think? Please let me know your thoughts on this. Do you think it was the right move to bring Cassie in to testify first? And has the prosecution made a strong opening over these first 2 days? By the way, one more detail. While Cassie was testifying, Diddy reportedly stared at her the entire time. Journalists inside the courtroom said it felt like he was trying to intimidate her with his stare. If you think about it from Cassie's perspective, after years of being under his complete control, it must have been incredibly difficult to face him in court and testify against him. They reportedly haven't seen or spoken to each other in 6 years. I imagine Cassie must have undergone serious psychological preparation to get ready for this moment. At least I hope so. Cassie wasn't alone though. While Diddy's family was there, Cassie was also supported by her husband and her brother. So thankfully, she had people backing her as well. And here's something interesting. Cassie reportedly didn't look at Diddy even once while on the stand. That reminded me of the Johnny Depp-Amber Heard trial. If you followed that, you may remember that Johnny Depp vowed Amber would never see his eyes again, and during the entire trial, he never once looked at her. Apparently, Cassie did the same. She didn't even glance at Diddy once. These are such strange relationships, such strange lives unfolding unfolding before our eyes. Cassie's testimony will continue on the third day, still under questioning by the prosecution. I'm currently working behind the scenes to prepare that coverage for us. I'll share it with you in the next episode. Cassie made some powerful statements on day 3 as well, and we're slowly approaching the start of her cross-examination. I'm very curious to see what Diddy's team will bring against her. What do you think about these first 2 days? I'm eager to hear your thoughts on everything that's been happening. Thank you once again for being part of my community, and I look forward to seeing you in our future videos. Until then, stay beautiful, stay natural, and stay you.